ladies and gentlemen, it is once again that time of the week where I, the Hoodrat Strategist, tell you about what is actually going down out there in the world today. News, opinions, politics, local activism. We tell you about what's not being talked about. We look with a microscope underneath the dirty carpet that is the mainstream media. We call out the establishment on its BS. And we give you that real truth. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. And as always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University. So I want to start off with a bit of local news. Talking about yesterday was the county ID. The final presentation on the Kalamazoo County ID. And I'll read a little bit from Malachi's article about it and give you a little bit of context, and then I will play a couple of citizen comments that I recorded. So, after 6 months, Kalamazoo County issued ID program is weeks away from a vote. And Tracy Hall is really backing it pretty hard. She said the county ID helps to solve specific problems, prove residency, and prove identity. And she said it doesn't give individuals legal rights they don't already have. The program, modeled on a version launched by Washtenaw County in 2014, would ensure residents without a state-issued ID would still have access to government and commercial services. Commissioners will likely vote on the resolution on July 5th. It is, the initial budget is about $60,000. It's going to start in 2018. And it's basically, it's $10. It's not only for, undocumented folks. It's also for, people who don't have the records necessary to obtain a state ID. A lot of people don't know. You need a lot of stuff in order to get one of those. Or maybe it's been a while since you got your driver's license. And for a lot of low-income residents who, have non-traditional family situations, maybe they don't know where they were born or where their family comes from. They don't know how to get a hold of their birth certificate. This would allow them an option locally here to get their hands on that ID. Now, it lets them do things like go to the library, open up a bank account, even more mundane things like being able to go out to a bar and get a beverage. It's all about participation and access, and it's for a segment of our population, which, as I will discuss a little further, is feeling kind of maligned by the institutional government here in Kalamazoo and the county. Well, misspoke. Kalamazoo. It's an MLive article about a study that was just done. I'll be talking about that in a little bit. But, furthermore, Commissioner Tunier said the county should take a step further and find a way to document non-citizen residents so they can become employed. Much like a state ID, residents would be required to prove their residency status and identify themselves with several documents. Various types of identification documents are valued on a point scale, and residents must provide 300 to 400 points worth of identification to qualify. So, for example, a passport is worth 200 points, a diploma, employment records, Baptismal records, those are worth like 50 points each. So the idea is if you have alternative forms of identification, you basically bring that all together and you can have access to this county ID. And Commissioner Rogers, in particular, she noted that it will make it easier for undocumented residents to receive health care and assist people released from state prisons. And according to the resolution, there are about 27,000 county residents right now who lack a government-issued ID card. So this would affect a very substantial amount of people, help a substantial amount of people, I should say. And some of the findings on the task force, this is kind of, this is what they told the commission and everybody else who came there that day. Just to give it a little bit more context for those of you who might still be a little wondering, who is the main focus behind this ID card? And particularly, it's for low-income elderly residents, youth in the foster system, transgender residents, emancipated youth, the homeless, individuals with disability, undocumented immigrants, survivors of domestic violence or human trafficking, and people who were recently released from prison. So all of these are, sensitive populations that have a lot of trouble, and certainly a lot more of a difficult time getting their hands on identification than people who do not have those particular situations, people who have not gone through those particular hardships. And I wanted to play one of the citizen comments from last night to really kind of bring it home how this affects area residents and, what sort of problems these seek to address.
And I believe that everyone should be easily able to get a photo ID.
Oh, and by the way, this is Alicia Johnson speaking, one of the coordinators with Michigan United, and generally a pretty dope activist here around town. So I'll let her finish her thought.
That is required to combat voter fraud. This process of obtaining photo IDs can be far more difficult than it looks for hundreds and thousands of people across the country. A lot of those people look like me. About 6 months ago, my mom was looking for an apartment. And a lot of folks were coming through there, and they were of color. They were black. And it looked like this particular what would you call him? Landlord was being discriminatory. But in looking more close, it was just that everyone that came through there didn't have an ID. So I'm here to say that this is more about, not just about those who are undocumented in our communities, which they are very important since we have so many, but also for people of color that look like me, who do not have access, or don't even know who their real parents are, or don't know where they were born. To get county IDs would make it easier for them. Also, a lot of folks that are getting out of jail and re-entering in our community, we want to make it easier for them to get housing and become and get jobs and become, people in the community who are giving and viable in our community. And if we want to talk about equity, equity means that everyone has possibilities and everyone should be able to get county IDs. So I'd just like to thank you. I thank you for all of the hard work you do. Sometimes we make mistakes. We should not be beat down for them, but we all should do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. Next.
Yep, that was Alicia Johnson speaking about, that dimension of it. I think there's a common misconception when we're talking about the county ID. Most people think it's only going to help, undocumented folks. And again, a lot of it has to do with economics and privilege and whether or not you have access to the materials you need to get a state ID. And, what she's talking about there was a situation where a lot of people in this, low-income area did not have that. And those are people that a county ID could directly help. Should it end up passing next month? Well, it should. Let's not knock on metaphorical wood here. So, wanted to play one more, and this is speaking towards it from another very important angle, and something that in particularly strikes me as a former, still disability advocate. I'm not as active in that particular world as I used to be, but it's still something very near and dear to my heart. My brother has autism. He's on the board of the Arcadia Foundation, which is a outreach group for those with mental disabilities. And I wanted to play this. This is a woman talking about the experience of her son and how a county ID could be helpful for him.
Permanently disabled from birth. When he turned 16, we knew there would not be driving for him, so we did not pursue any kind of driver's license or anything for him. My husband and I have power of attorney for him, so we sign things and read documents and talk with him about things. 2 years ago, when he was 23, Nick asked us to take him out of state to a fan convention. And on the website of the fan convention, when I was registering him, it said that everyone that came through the door had to show a picture ID. Well, Nick did not have a picture ID. So I got on the Secretary of State website and looked at what we would need to, document-wise, to get him a state ID. And we took that stuff down there. I had his Michigan birth certificate, his social security card, and 5 pieces of mail that had his name and his address on it, including mail from the federal government regarding his SSI benefits, from the state of Michigan regarding his SSI benefits from them, and also regarding his state of Michigan medical coverage. When we got up to the desk and I showed them all the documentation that I had, we were told it was not enough. So I was stunned, to say the least, that my son, who is in the federal system as a person, who's in the state of Michigan system as a person, was being denied a state ID. To conclude, for Nick's safety and for others like him, I would ask you to please support the county ID program. And thank you so much for your time and for your hard work.
So, leading into that, one of the things I spoke about near the top of the show was how this program would be helpful for low-income folks. And there was an article published just yesterday by MLive. And it's very timely when we're talking about socioeconomic issues. The title of it is "Poor Non-Whites Have Lower Opinion of Kalamazoo's Prosperity." This is written by Malachi Barrett, again published yesterday. And I'll give you just, some basic details about it, and then I'll go down and talk about the demographic data that I was referring to earlier. So, article begins. Results from a citizen survey show that while most Kalamazoo residents have a positive opinion of their quality of life, this is less true for non-white and poor citizens. A preliminary summary of the responses gathered from 291 residents were released in a draft document of the city's strategic vision. A random sample of 1,500 households were mailed invitations to anonymously participate in February. Kalamazoo took advantage of the survey developed by Colorado-based National Research Center Incorporated to assess the livability of the city. Findings are part of the community feedback gathered through the Imagine Kalamazoo 2025 Master Plan and Strategic Vision process. Assistant City Manager Laura Lamb said the Imagine Kalamazoo process was meant to engage as many residents as possible. However, her team felt it important to compare results to a scientifically significant sample that represents the demographics of the city. According to the survey, almost 3/4 of residents rated their quality of life as excellent or good. Same number plan to remain in Kalamazoo for the next 5 years. However, responders who identified as non-white felt less safe and more negatively about the quality of services provided by the city and the overall direction Kalamazoo is taking. So let's go ahead and talk about what they actually found out in the survey about the poor and non-white folks living here in Kalamazoo and how it differs from the general Caucasian consensus, as it were. When broken down by demographics, several trends started to appear. Lamb said staff are just beginning to draw conclusions based on responses from different age, race, and socioeconomic groups. We need to see the community through a lot of different lenses, Lamb said. It's important that you don't gloss over total stats. We need to understand from each neighborhood's perspective, what it means to be complete. And I think that helps to drive these broad goals that say, what are we going to do about it? Kalamazoo's non-white population had a more negative opinion of the city overall. They also reported feeling less safe in the city. Non-white residents responded more negatively to questions about Kalamazoo's natural environment, health and wellness, economic health, sense of community, overall appearance, opportunities to attend cultural activities, and overall acceptance of diversity. They also find it harder to get places in the city. So I wanted to unpack that for a little bit. So Kalamazoo's natural environment. Now, a little bit of backstory. So the two main hubs in Kalamazoo are, at least like most diverse. North Side and the North Side neighborhood, the Edison neighborhood. Edison is a little bit more mixed. North Side is more predominantly black. And both of these neighborhoods have bared the brunt of a lot of environmental racism. A good example in Edison. So for many years, there's lived the Allied Paper Mill site, which is full of a lot of toxic chemicals, PCBs, really like a lot of bad stuff. When I lived in the neighborhood, I was keeping a very close eye on it. I spoke out on it many times myself, and there was a kind of push and pull with the EPA about what to do about it. Removal would have been the best option, but it would have also been more expensive. So instead, a lot of those toxic chemicals got buried. Yeah. And one of the really alarming things about that is these chemicals actually are just above important well water sites that provide that area and a lot of other areas in Kalamazoo with clean and safe drinking water. Additionally, I actually learned some new information about the health clinic that is over there on Alcott. They built up a new health clinic there, and a lot of people in the city government are, very, very happy about it, and a lot of residents are very happy about it. But there's also some apprehension because it is very, very close to the Allied paper site. And from what I heard, originally they were a lot more fast and loose with doing a proper environmental safety study. One of our county commissioners had to basically point it out and tell them to do it. It was basically to determine if the weight of the building would sink those chemicals near into the well water. They found out that it wouldn't, but the fact that a county official had to remind them is pretty startling. We also, the north side until very recently did not have access to a neighborhood grocery store. There's a lot of old factories near the north side that have been kind of lackadaisical with their cleanup efforts from days gone by. And until recently, there were not many resources put into making sure that the environment of the North Side neighborhood was protected from those sorts of things. Health and wellness is, another important factor. I mean, that's overarching. That's part of, the national healthcare problem. When you're poor, and this is the healthcare system we have now. So if you're put in a place where you either have to get insurance or you have to pay a fine, some people elect to pay the fine. If it ends up being cheaper for them over the course of the year, and this is actually something that I had to do when I was younger. I paid the fine because health insurance for me was just too expensive. And a lot of times, the kind of health care that is offered for lower income peoples ends up having a lot of co-pays. And it restricts a lot of access to preventative care. People will only go in when they absolutely need to, versus somebody from a better part of the neighborhood, maybe they got a better job with a better health insurance plan, they'll just go to the doctor whenever they're sick. If you're poor, you only go to the doctor if you think, wow, you know what, I think I might drop dead if I don't go to the doctor. Or, something is really wrong. I might have cancer, that sort of thing. And, economic health kind of speaks for itself. And, the only thing I'll really add to that is as much as our city has improved as far as, the downtown area, we've got these programs like The Promise. There have been improvements in neighborhoods like the Edison North Side, but it's been mostly self-determination type things. People rising up to plant their own community gardens, build their own networks and organizations and structures. But there hasn't been enough of a on-the-ground effort from the city to make sure that the resources that the city has are properly utilized to help out our low-income neighborhoods. Kalamazoo Promise is a good example of this. Now, I myself got the Promise. I was from the first graduating class. Got the Promise, but to this day, graduation rates for African American males have remained stagnant. African American women slightly increased, but not nearly to the extent that they have for middle class white people. Without that actual community outreach, while it is amazing to have access to that program that can provide free tuition, without an actual physical follow-up in the community, it turns out just being kind of a bonus or, you know, a stipend for a lot of middle-class, more privileged folks to live here. You can come live in, you know, one of the Millwood, Winchell neighborhoods. You'll get the free college. You get to live in a very nice and beautiful neighborhood, which, again, overall appearance, you'll go to the nice parts of the town. The roads are all nice. The parks are all well-trimmed, manicured, as it were. Upkeep in places like Edison and North Side are definitely not as good. Roads are bad everywhere in the city. Actually, part of this report said only 6% of residents approve of how our roads are being taken care of, which is pretty dramatic, but not necessarily surprising. But there is a marked difference between the roads and sidewalks in places like Edison and Northside and some of the more better off neighborhoods, of course, you know, the downtown area, which honestly, I think this cuts to the root of a much larger problem, which is I am seeing so many of these resources being put into downtown. And I guess the idea is to like draw in tourists and tourist money. And, you know, somebody who grew up in a working class neighborhood here in Kalamazoo, I find that, you know, a bit offensive. Downtown's already great. And what we really need to do is focus those resources where they're needed. You don't need to rebuild Bronson Park or build a whole bunch of new buildings downtown. Downtown's where it's at. I love downtown. I do. But if you want to spend all your money just polishing that up while ignoring the infrastructure and the poor neighborhoods, then you're not really making Kalamazoo great. You're just making it nice to look at. We're going to cut out real quick for a short break. We get back, we'll have more discussion about Kalamazoo, national issues, so on and so forth. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Van Humane Society is a non-for-profit, no-kill animal shelter that has been serving Allegan, Van Buren, and surrounding areas for almost 50 years. They are hosting their CARES Fund Drive and are over halfway to their $500,000 goal. Alvan can currently house around 30 dogs and 100 cats. Money raised from the CARES campaign will go to build a new shelter, which will expand this capacity by 20%. Alvan Humane Society has 20 dogs and 40 cats that are microchipped, spayed and neutered, and fully vaccinated, ready for adoption right now. To adopt a pet, donate to the CARES Fund Drive, or find out more, feel free to visit them on the web at www.al-van.org.
Are you trying to get your local Kalamazoo business name out to the WMU and Greater Kalamazoo communities? Why not do so while supporting Radio Evolution through underwriting and donations? For more information, please visit widrfm.org.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So I wanted to finish up with a few other thoughts about this article that was published yesterday in MLive. It's that article is "Poor Non-Whites Have Lower Opinion of Kalamazoo's Prosperity," and if you want to read it in full, again, that's on the MLive website, written by Malachi Barrett. So it also says, like, the non-white residents responded more negatively to questions about opportunities to attend cultural activities and the overall acceptance of diversity. So one of the things about Kalamazoo that I feel has really been an issue for a long time is, while Kalamazoo is demographically a very diverse city, the neighborhoods and the culture of those neighborhoods very much live in silos. Like, you can say Edison, you could say Vine, you could say North Side, you could say Winchell, and you can pretty much, like, take a very quick guess what that culture of that neighborhood is. You don't need not be blurry about that subject, because they are basically like mini cities unto themselves. And where is the interaction necessarily between those parts of the city? And granted, we're not some small town, I realize, where everybody's going to know each other's names. But for as, politically progressive as people like to say Kalamazoo is, it's hard to find, intersectionality. We've, again, people kind of live in their own cultural silos. Whether by choice or just by the culture of this town. I myself, I'm a little unusual because, like, when I was growing up in the Edison neighborhood, I spent a lot of time hanging out with friends in the good part of town. Hanging out. Edison is the goodest part of town. Let me say that. I was letting some of my economic programming disparage my own home turf there. Sorry. Anybody listening from the Edison, I didn't mean it. I love that place. That's where I grew up. But yeah, again, like I said, a lot of people stay in their silos. That's been a difficulty with, some of the organizing around town. Is that, this resistance to Trump, as it were, has predominantly been a lot of the older white folks from areas like Winchell and Oakwood and the downtown area coming out to the park. And, there's been, not to say that all of these crowds are super vanilla, they're not, but where's been the community outreach to the people who are most disproportionately affected by that agenda? It needs to be, a better push to include and welcome outside voices, particularly in cases where, the people who are really going to be affected by this are the poorest citizens in the city. And granted, the poorest citizens in the city, maybe they're working too hard to come out to all these rallies, and I understand that as well. My parents growing up, my dad would work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. He probably didn't feel like going out with a sign at the end of the day. Or if he even had time in that day to come out to an event like that. But where we can find that kind of solidarity, that's where we need to do a better job of building a more intersectional activist movement here in Kalamazoo. And they also said it's harder to get to places in the city. I will say they've been doing, it's gotten slightly better, but I still have complaints. And what I mean by that is we're talking about the Metro Transit, the bus lines. I personally use the bus, not super often. My job and my home are within walking distance, and Vine neighborhood it's pretty self-sufficient. We need a grocery store, which different and unrelated news story. There is a developer who's bought up the old Harding's building and is going to be changing it so it's no longer a food desert in that area. But sorry, I went off a little bit on a tangent there. But the Metro Transit, in comparison to similarly sized cities, before the millage passed and we have expanded service and Sunday service, was pretty embarrassing. Only hourly service from 6 to 10 in a city where increasing numbers of people are using the bus. Not only low-income individuals, but a lot of people who are more environmentally conscious. They don't own a car for those reasons, and maybe a little bit of both. I know a lot of people in the Vine neighborhood who don't want a car and really can't afford it. I'm one of those people. So where we're at now is we have 7-day service. It used to be that they didn't do service on Sunday. Now the buses run 7 days a week. There's extra service for particularly busy bus lines like Westnedge. So there'll be a bus at on the hour, 15 minutes on the hour, and 45 minutes on the hour until about 6 or 7 p.m. I believe. So we've gotten some traction on that, but when you compare us to cities like Ann Arbor, cities like Grand Rapids, even Detroit, they've got a far more robust public transportation infrastructure than we do, and we still need to catch up a whole lot. How that's going to be done, I don't know exactly, although I will say the climate plan that was put forward to our city government does include expanding public transportation for both economic and environmental reasons into a county-wide public transportation system. I can only assume that would include making the system here in Kalamazoo more robust, and that is definitely something I would like to see in the coming years. It's one of those kind of two birds, one stone type of issues, because not only are we helping out lower income residents who depend on the bus system to a much greater extent, but considering the buses primarily run on alternative biofuels and healthier engines that produce less CO2, that's something that we definitely need to push for. Going on with this article, also said renters also feel less safe in Kalamazoo, had a worse opinion on the available of quality affordable housing. It is kind of a crapshoot. Whether you get a good landlord or a bad landlord in this town is really a throw of the dice. And let's be clear. There's this great quote: "It's expensive to be poor," and that is certainly no more true than here in the city. Depending on what kind of landlord you get, your price will be gouged. Maybe you'll find a fair deal. But I have heard a lot of horror stories from just about every neighborhood where there's a lot of apartments and communal housing. Vine certainly has a lot of culprits. I recall a friend of mine several friends of mine lived on a house over on Oak Street, and this was 2 years ago during a particularly harsh winter. We had stretches with negative temperatures, and they refused to, not refused, but they neglected to fix the furnace for about a month. So these friends of mine were basically living in a cold, frozen house where they had to use space heaters, which is also a lot more expensive than having a furnace running. And that sort of behavior is really unacceptable. And you see that in a lot of, the poorer, the cheaper the housing is, the less, or at least I'd say the greater the chances you will have a landlord like that who's willing to cut corners, neglect their duties, and put you in a harmful situation. And they also felt worse about Kalamazoo's cost of living, which, to be fair, Kalamazoo actually has a very low cost of living. It's one of the lowest cost of living ratios in the major Midwestern cities, and even particularly college towns. However, there's kind of like that gentrification feedback loop where, people come in because they hear, oh, Kalamazoo's a hip town that's really cheap to live, and as people get interested, the prices start going up. And in a sense, areas like Edison and the North Side, they have their own cultures that kind of protect them from that sort of thing. Vine has kind of been seeing some push and pull on that. I'm lucky enough, I only have to pay about $215 in rent. I share a house with several other people, but still, that's a pretty fantastic deal, and you'll find the deals like that around the Vine neighborhood, but that's becoming increasingly rare. So, what do we need to do? We need to make sure that, the poor people in Kalamazoo, low-income residents, don't feel like they're being left behind. And I feel like a lot of the moves by the city recently, again, like giving money for projects to help beautify or gentrify downtown while, leaving neighborhoods like Edison and the North Side to their own devices, that speaks to that sort of resentment. Now, granted, I don't want to put too much, point my finger too much at like a lot of local politicians here. They do a lot of great work in the neighborhoods and with the constituents they represent to address their issues. But again, I feel like, Kalamazoo walks this line where we want to be business friendly and also, help out our lower income residents. And, the businesses, to me, they've been prioritized for a while, to a much greater extent than the people who actually live here. That needs to be the opposite. We've got to prioritize our citizens, our residents here in the city before we try to, make this a greater place for tourism, or we make this a, business-friendly town where, they want to come in and build it up, but not necessarily do so in a way that helps out the communities here in town that actually need it. That's what the narrative has to be. That's what people need. People in our city government, our county government, need to focus on. All right, I think we've spent a good amount of time on that particular topic. So why don't we move on, talk about something happening across the state. I did want to report on this because this is actually a cauldron of a lot of different issues. And it's not necessarily one with a clear answer, but it ties into, the Muslim ban. It ties into, the ICE raids that have been going on. It also ties into the war on drugs, and just from a moral perspective, how we deal with people who have broken the law and are undocumented. So this is from an article by Ben Solis. It's published on June 19th. Headline is, "Man set to be deported to Iraq doesn't even speak Arabic," family says. Hadir Siba, who grew up in the U.S., according to relatives, was one of 114 Chaldean immigrants from Iraq facing deportation after widespread Immigration and Customs Enforcement arrests, ICE, that took place in Metro Detroit on June 11th. If he gets put on a plane to Baghdad, the 46-year-old from Sterling Heights will find himself in a country so foreign to him that it might as well be Mars, family members said. He can't speak Arabic, the primary language in Iraq, and his family also believes the Virgin Mary tattooed on his arm will get him murdered by Muslim extremist groups like ISIS that have been targeting Chaldeans in recent years. Siba's story is not unique, with ICE ramping up efforts to reduce the backlog of immigrants who have been ordered removed, but remain in the U.S. The recent wave of arrests was sparked by a March agreement with the Iraqi government, in which the war-torn Middle Eastern nation agreed to take back Iraqi nationals subject to removal from the U.S., according to ICE. Khalid Walls, a spokesperson for ICE's Detroit office, said agents are primarily targeting those with criminal convictions, which can effectively revoke a green card. Just for those of you who don't know, so ICE has a much larger presence on the east side of the state, and also who has a much larger presence is the U.S. Border Patrol. Although they technically have jurisdiction over the whole state because our coastlines count as borders. So essentially, they mostly stay on the east side of the state. The Border Patrol only comes out very sporadically. ICE has been seen in Kalamazoo several times. We've talked about it on the show before. Usually, ICE spottings in Kalamazoo were extremely rare, and it was only when they would come, pick up a specific person who had a criminal record, and leave. What we've seen in the last couple months, ICE officers show up to town, stick around for a few hours, harass people, then leave. And then maybe there's an arrest somewhere in there. So, this culture that we're in under Trump, and let's be clear too, under Obama, at least before Trump, Obama's administration and ICE under him deported more individuals than any other president in history. A lot of immigration activists called Obama the deporter-in-chief. Now, the rate at which people are getting picked up since Trump got in office, it's increased, but more importantly, their tactics have changed in a very alarming way. Obama's administration focused on nighttime raids, specific individuals' criminal records. Trump paints a much broader brush. They did a huge hiring surge of ICE officials with much looser requirements. They don't even need to know Spanish. And let me ask you just colloquially, what kind of people is that going to draw? People who don't know Spanish, or who can't speak Arabic, in this particular case, people who don't have a foreign language requirement, getting hired on to deport people. Well, let's just say, to quote, a famous rock and roll group, some of those that work forces are the same that burnt crosses. It's actually this funny Twitter meme going around. It's not funny, but they're sharing a story about it's this study that shows that white supremacists are infiltrating law enforcement across the country, and there's like this line below written. It's written in such a way. It's like, are you saying that some of those that work forces ... are the same that Okay, enough of the Rage Against the Machine reference. So let's talk a little bit more about Hadir Siba. So this isn't a clear-cut case where, this is a good man who's being targeted by ICE, maybe with like a parking ticket in his past that they're using to deport him. That's kind of like the Trump administration's modus operandi. But this man actually does have a criminal past. He's scheduled to face trial on June 22nd for intimidating witness. He's accused in 2015 of threatening a woman who was a witness in an arson case. 2016, he pleaded guilty to a marijuana possession charge. Pleaded guilty to a no drug use charge in August 2014. And his family acknowledged he was arrested in New Mexico on a drug charge about 15 to 20 years ago. Court records also showed he was convicted of possession of a controlled substance with an intent to distribute in 2002. He also pleaded guilty in 2005 to a federal bank fraud charge related to the theft of checks from the U.S. Post Office and was ordered to pay $1.1 million in restitution. Most recently, he served a 7-month probation term that ended in April for lying to a law enforcement officer, according to state corrections records. So, I would say, like, the two crimes there that are in my mind are really more distressing have to do with, threatening the woman, intimidating a witness. The rest of those crimes are, by definition, nonviolent. And, we can, I'm sure, I could have a pretty staunch debate about this with a lot of people on both the right and the left. Like, what is the line? Where can we say, well, they've broken all these sort of laws, we should deport them if they're here and they're undocumented? So, problem here is, here's my rationale on it. Siba has been here so long that he's basically a de facto American citizen, and that's the thing that ICE is doing now that is really more, morally outrageous than anything. It's not that they're taking people who've maybe been in the country a couple years and, if they committed a violent crime. Even I would argue it's like, well, yeah, that I could understand the grounds for deportation. But they've been mostly targeting people who, not mostly, but they've now been increasing the rate at which they target individuals who have been in the country so long that they don't know any other way of life. Like, as I read earlier in an article, this man doesn't even know Arabic. He's got a Virgin Mary tattoo. He is not part of the culture of Iraq at all. By all any stretch of the imagination, this dude is basically an American who's made some mistakes. And Grant, I don't like that stuff about him intimidating witnesses, but the rest of it are nonviolent drug offenses, which, again, we can go and talk about how that ties into the way our country enforces its drug laws, which are far more harsh, punitive, and draconian than just about any other country on the planet. We have a military-industrial complex that seeks to funnel people into prison for these kind of charges in order as a source of free labor. And while that might be getting kind of beyond the point, what I really wanted to emphasize there is, this is a coalescence between, the tactics, the strategies of the war on drugs and ICE. And, frankly, I don't know this man's history. But, a lot of people who get involved in drug crimes do it out of economic necessity. They don't do it because they want to become the next Walter White or, I don't know, that woman from Leeds, whatever her name was. Oh, I mean, she did, like... Well, she wanted to keep her nice house in the suburbs. I would have told her, go move to an apartment. Yeah, just shut up with that noise. Struggle can make people, help people develop. Probably would have helped your sons anyway. Anyway, so stop talking about cable television. Again, a lot of people do commit these crimes out of economic necessity. And, that's where the line is here. That's where kind of the precedence for outrage is here for me. Is that we're trying to send this guy out of the country he's an American who made some mistakes. An American who fell prey to our own unfair and institutionally racist drug laws. And now we're basically going to send him to a completely alien culture and he has no idea how to live in. And, again, it ties into the Trump administration's own hateful rhetoric and how they view certain people as not being Americans. If you've lived here your whole life, you're an American. And if you don't have a document, if you don't have a birth certificate or a social security number, at least morally, from my perspective, that doesn't matter. You're a de facto American, and you should not be sent halfway across the world just because you made a mistake. So we're going to take a quick break. Head back. We'll keep the discussion going. Talk about some more issues that have been popping off in the national news media. Anyway, this is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
I hated the Colonel with his wee beady eyes and that smug look on his face. Oh, you're gonna buy my chicken. Oh.
89.1 FM, WIDR.
Then how can you hate the Colonel? Because he puts an addictive chemical in his chicken that makes you crave it fortnightly, smartass.
Kalamazoo.
Support for Wider FM comes from Pedal Bicycles, now with 2 locations in downtown Kalamazoo and Portage. Pedal Bicycles has the right bike for every Kalamazoo rider, whether you're blazing the trails, cruising the streets, or just getting off the training wheels. To keep your ride running smooth, Pedal Bicycles offers multiple levels of repair services, anything from a quick tune-up to a complete overhaul. And to keep you safe and looking fly, Pedal Bicycles has all of the gear and apparel you'll need. To discover your spin within, head to 185 Romans Road in Portage, 611 West Michigan Avenue in downtown Kalamazoo, or pedalbicycle.com. Thanks, Pedal Bicycle, for supporting sustainable transportation, Buns of Steel, and Radio Evolution.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, quick musical break while I go do some business. You were listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Your only source for political revolution. So before the break, we were talking about an article from MLive about a man named Hadir Siba. He is facing deportation to Iraq, despite the fact that he has not been there since he was a young child. He can't speak Arabic, and for all intents and purposes, he's essentially an American, just without the citizenship. So I wanted to make sure that I capped off, let you know. So here's what's going on behalf of, here's what's going on Siba's behalf. Multiple activist groups are turning to federal court to try to prevent deportations. The American Civil Liberties Union filed a class action lawsuit Thursday. Until recently, petitioners were living peacefully in the community, reporting regularly to Immigration and Customs Enforcement and complying with their other conditions of release, the ACLU argues in the court complaint. This changed suddenly on June 11, 2017, when, with no warning, ICE began arresting and detaining petitioners on the grounds that Iraq has now agreed to take them back. ICE then transferred most of them to a detention center in Youngstown, Ohio, far from their families and their retained counsel. U.S. law prohibits the removal of individuals to countries where they would face a likelihood of prosecution or torture. And the group, by any means necessary, was planning its own lawsuit aiming to label this round of deportations unconstitutional. Shanta Driver, lead attorney for the group, said the group will seek an injunction to halt the new deportation policy in the same way a handful of federal judges struck down the president's travel ban. There are constitutional issues dealing with people's due process rights, she said. I think they should be given a fair trial and a hearing instead of being sent away with nothing. She said previous protections promised to those arrested last weekend affected the way they defended themselves in legal proceedings. The people being picked up now relied on the contract they made years ago with ICE that said, "You're not going to be deported. Don't worry about bringing legal proceedings forward," Driver said. So these people did nothing, and now they're facing deportation and we're in this mad rush to file their paperwork. ICE knows the people that they're picking up. There's no question about it. For 25 years, they have not sent people back to Iraq. So it goes on to talk about another case, a very similar one. Firdoa al-Dalami, the deportation of her father could mean them losing him for good. Abadoun al-Dalami is 68 years old, uses a breathing machine to treat sleep apnea, and has a stent in his heart. He can barely walk now, she said, but in his past, according to ICE, he served 15 years in prison for aggravated assault and was ordered removed from the U.S. in March 2006. His daughter claims the assault occurred when he witnessed his son being jumped by a group of men and went after the attackers. And basically, for some context, there's a video here that shows ICE arresting this elderly man, 68 years old, at the Metro Detroit airport. He's an old man who's very sick, Doa said. He has medical needs and usually has doctors and nurses come to him. What do they want from an old guy? An old guy isn't going to hurt anyone. ICE argues that the arrests and deportation efforts are meant to protect Americans from criminal aliens. The operation in this region was specifically conducted to address the very real public safety represented by criminal aliens arrested, said Rebecca Aducci, Field Office Director for ICE in Detroit. Okay, so let's be clear here. Their rationale is they're trying to protect the American public from these dangerous criminals. This guy's a 68-year-old. who can barely get around on his own, needs nurses to attend to him, and they want to send him back to Iraq, where he has no family, no friends, no contacts. So, this is a death sentence. They have given Abadoun al-Dulami a death sentence because for 15 years he was in prison for aggravated assault. Do they expect him to assault anyone in the near future? He's almost 70. He has a stent in his heart. Oh, and by the way, sleep apnea, if you don't have that machine, you risk suffocating in the middle of the night and dying. You know, I don't necessarily think people listening to this show need a reminder of just how craven and morally bankrupt a lot of these policies are, but sometimes you need some clear examples to show you this is happening on the other side of the state. This is happening to someone who not only... Okay, this other guy had a worse record, couldn't speak the language. He's younger. You could make a hypothetical argument that like he could find a way to survive. This other gentleman, how is he going to survive in Iraq by himself? How? His entire support system is here. He's very old. He's not healthy. You know, I'm picturing in my head like, you know, my own father, and I love him very much, but he's not very agile these days. You know, he's kind of at home. He can walk for you know, short amounts of time. I'm imagining him like, what if, you know, let's say, you know, my dad was apparently originally from Iraq and they sent him home there. He wouldn't make it. Neither would this man. This is gross. This is gross. That's what this is. And now I'm not going to read the rest of Rebecca Ducci's comment. It's trying to morally justify this crap, and that's what this is. It's horrible, amoral crap. That's what it is. So, yeah, that's going on the east side. And as I said before, ICE has been out here intimidating people in our local Hispanic community. So, watch out for your neighbors, folks. That's all I can say. Knowledge is power, and, you know, if folks know that they're coming to an area, they can figure something out. Prepare. Because I don't want to hear about no 68-year-old men or women here in Kalamazoo getting deported halfway across the world for a death sentence. I don't want to hear about that happening in Detroit or anywhere in America. Anywhere in the world, really. But it's happened in our state, ladies and gentlemen, and can't keep waiting for it to get closer to home. So let's move on towards national issue. So if you follow national politics, you'll know that Jon Ossoff lost his runoff election in Georgia the other night. And, you know, this is kind of a, you know, my whole thing with this is Jon Ossoff. Oh, well, you know, cry me a river. This guy doesn't support, he's a Democrat, doesn't support single payer, got a lot of corporate money, and, you know, to his credit, a lot of individual donations too, kind of on the Bernie Sanders scale, but he was definitely a centrist, an economic centrist Democrat running down in Georgia. And he lost by a worse margin than Hillary did. I want to make that very clear. In that district, Hillary lost by 1.5 points. Ossoff lost by 3.8. And that was after he ran the most expensive congressional race in history. The Democrats dumped so much money on Jon Ossoff. And, the reason for that is Jon Ossoff, for the Democratic establishment, was kind of going to be a proof of concept. Well, it's like, if we can get one of our center-right candidates to win in a deep red district, then we can prove all these Bernie people wrong, tell them this is how it's done, this is how we're going to do it. Well, right now, in all the special elections, since Trump got into office, Democrats are 0-4, which you would think with the most unpopular president of all time, they would have racked up at least one victory, but nope. And, about two of those were the progressive Bernie-crats. Let's admit that right now. Although, I will say for their credit, in both Kansas and Montana, they did better numbers out there than Democrats have done in those same areas in years and years and decades. So, what we'll see is, and I really hope we see this, as I was reading a New York Times article. New York Times, these people carry water for the establishment more than a lot of other mainstream sources, and they had an article that was critical of the Democrats, their strategy, and talking about how a lot of people are losing faith in Nancy Pelosi, who has been one of the most outspoken advocates of let's just keep things the way they are, even though it's obviously not working. I was at the People Summit, heard Bernie speak. And one of the best points he made was, the strategy of the Democratic Party has been an absolute failure. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact. And if you look at the governorships, the amount of Democrats in state legislatures nationwide, obviously they're not in majority in the Senate, Congress, to Supreme Court, or the executive branch. Yeah, the Democratic Party's wiped out. In my opinion, chiefly because it doesn't really stand for anything. It has the potential to, and there are a lot of people in the party who are pushing for it to actually stand for a true, leftist progressive agenda. But as long as there's the people running things, the people running the party think that the vision is people like Jon Ossoff, who is a handsome neoliberal center-right candidate. They're going to keep losing. Jimmy Dore, who, by the way, I highly recommend him. He's a comedian who also calls out the establishment on their BS and does it in a much richer and funnier way than I do. Said, if you make the people choose between a Republican and a Republican, they're going to pick the Republican every time. And, well, down there in Georgia, they picked the Republican. A Trump Republican, no less. She was endorsed by his administration and shares a lot of the same rhetoric and values. So, that's me talking some degree of smack about how the Democratic establishment wing of the Democratic Party all coalesced around this guy, gave him tons of money, and he didn't pull it off. And about, him as a candidate. He was not a strong candidate with a strong message. It was all about identity politics. It was all about, ooh, Trump's bad. That's not how you get people out to vote. But, there's another element to this, too, which has to do a lot with, some of what I was talking about right after the November election, which was Jon Ossoff would have won had it not been for a lot of very skeezy and deliberate voter suppression tactics developed by the GOP. People like Chris Kobach and their cross-check suppression system. And again, I'll emphasize this as I try to repeatedly, just because this is not sunken into the American public yet through both, obviously through a lot of obfuscation, but cross-check is what caused President Trump. Cross-check is what caused President Trump. It is a voter suppression system that compares names across states. It is to prevent statistically non-existent voter fraud from occurring. That's when somebody votes more than once, which literally, like, you can count the number of people who did this in the 2016 election on two hands. So what this system does, it cross-references names across states, and if you have the same name as someone else, you get knocked off the voter roll. Even if your middle name is different, you get knocked off the voter roll, potentially. There were about 70,000 votes lost at the east side of Michigan because of this. And you could say with some degree of authority, well, that's why Trump won, isn't it? Yeah, that is why Trump won the state of Michigan, because of this voter suppression system. So I'm going to play a clip after the break from Democracy Now! And one of my absolute heroes, Mr. Greg Palast, one of the best investigative reporters on election integrity in the country, went down to Georgia to talk more about what was going on and exactly what kind of shenanigans they ran on our democracy down there. So I'm going to play a couple quick messages, and then we'll get into that video. I'll introduce it again. You're listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Is lack of summer green bringing you down? Finch Greenhouse, located in Wood Hall on WMU's campus, might be the perfect thing for you. With hours Monday through Thursday from 9:30 to 3:30 p.m. and on Friday until 1:30, this space will bring you to a time before urbanization. Located inside Wood Hall, the space is open to the public with an extensive and varied plant collection with a wide range of diversity from orchids to succulents and many more. A friendly reminder from Wider to enjoy life.
This is an open slot in the Wider Clock and could be filled with an underwriting announcement for your local Kalamazoo business. For more information, please visit widerfm.org and head to the support page.
ladies and gentlemen, we are back. You are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the election down in Georgia that Jon Ossoff, the special election where Jon Ossoff lost. There is a report from Greg Palast going into detail about basically what happened down in Georgia and how the votes were, basically manipulated and suppressed in order to get the outcome that the Republican Party wanted. So this is from an interview he did with Truth Out by Mark Carlin. And I'll go ahead and just read Mr. Palast's comments. One of the worst parts is the systemic disenfranchisement of the Asian American community. For years, I've followed the work of the Asian American Legal Advocacy Center, a group running a campaign to register new Americans to vote. When the group complained about thousands of the collected names missing from the voter rolls, the Secretary of State, a Republican, retaliated against them. According to attorney Nusay Ufut, they were doing a campaign to register 10,000 Korean Americans to vote and had quite a bit of success. At some point during the campaign, they noticed that many of the folks they were registering were not showing up on the voter rolls. So they reached out to the Secretary of State to say, hey, where are our folks? Why aren't they showing up on the rolls? They never got an official response. What they did get was the GBI kicking in the door and requesting all of their files. While no charges were brought, the terrifying raid was enough to at least temporarily derail the 10,000 Korea votes campaign. According to a written statement sent to Greg, and this is from Greg Palast's interview, so I'll just refer to him as Palast when he says me. Sent to Palast yesterday by Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta, the 10,000 Korean votes campaign ended in 2015. Since that time, the Asian American Legal Advocacy Center has ceased to exist as such, though at least some of its work is being carried on by the group that replaced it, the Atlanta branch of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which continues to engage in voter registration efforts. UFOT's own group, New Georgia Project, has also seen the registrations of new voters of color suspiciously vanish. UFOT told Palast, we submitted 86,419,000 voter registration forms. There are 46,000 of the folks that we've registered who made it, and 40,000 of them are missing. So, New Georgia Project contacted the Republican Secretary of State's office. You know what they told us, UFOT asked. We don't know what you're talking about. What forms? They did not disappear. We intentionally registered voters on paper forms so that we could make copies. We know who they were not on the voter rolls. When African American activists raised a ruckus over the disappearance, they got the same treatment as the Korean Americans, a Gestapo-style raid on their offices, threats of criminal charges, and a jail term. So he goes on to they ask him, what dirty tricks do you think Handel's campaign and state officials who support her, Handel was Jon Ossoff's opponent in the runoff election. What dirty tricks do you think Handel's campaign and state officials who support her will engage in to keep the Ossoff vote down? Palast goes on to say, Ossoff's actually a bit ahead in the polling, but they won't let his voters vote. They've used the cross-check purge system to wrongly remove God knows how many voters in the 6th district of Georgia. When voters show up and they've had their names purged or their names never made it to the rolls in the first place, they'll get provisional ballots. And those placebo ballots just won't get counted. They use the same old Jim Crow tricks as well. 100,000 ballots were cast early, with almost all the early polling stations in the white area of the very large district. This has severely cut black early voting. This will be amplified on Election Day when the polls are again concentrated in white areas, leaving black and Asian voters to wait in lines in the Georgia heat. He is then asked, is the Democratic Party doing anything to push back against the handle Jim Crow tactics? And I found this particularly interesting. One of my big complaints is, like, why doesn't the Democratic Party more vocal about voter suppression? And granted, a few of them are, but as a broader party, when it comes to voter suppression and election integrity, even when it's clearly like Republicans doing it, they remain pretty quiet, silent. So that question he answers, is the Democratic Party doing anything? And Greg Palast answers, far more than other state Democratic parties, because the Georgia party is led by brilliant militant black woman Stacey Abrams. But don't count on the Democrats to protect black votes. It just won't happen. But there was a group formed in the 6th 2 weeks ago, organized by Dee Hunter of the Civil Rights Project Washington, to aim particularly at cross-check, but also at other ugly racist vote-snatching tactics. Hunter has put together a stellar group, including the ACLU, Common Cause, and major African-American leaders, which will now go on the road to Virginia, Ohio, Michigan, Texas, and beyond to educate and agitate against the sophisticated new Jim Crow tactic. One point I must add, vote suppressors try to steal your vote because it's valuable. So vote. Vote because they don't want you to. So, again, in summary, the left is never going to achieve victories if they don't talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is election integrity. It's stuff like this cross-check system. And, even going back further, something else Greg Palast said in an interview, this was with The Real News several months ago, why weren't the Democrats more adamant about calling out cross-check, especially right after the election? You would think Hillary Clinton, she really wanted to be president, so she would have brought it up. And one of the things that Greg brought up was like, well, their hands aren't clean either. There's all the WikiLeaks that revealed malfeasance in the Democratic primary, and also a lot of evidence of vote flipping and, off-matching, exit polls, a lot of things that would lead you to conclude that they were doing some systemic election fraud with, the vote numbers during the Democratic primary. And this is actually something we're going to be talking about in more detail in a couple weeks around the anniversary of the DNC. So here's a question. We've got a new crop of these Democrats that are rising up to talk about the issues, talk about health care for all, universal health care, talk about income inequality, talk about race in stark and real terms. There's not just lip service. Talk about Black Lives Matter, the indigenous rights movement. Will people rise up to talk about election integrity? Especially in situations like this with this cross-check system, which if we allow it to fly under the radar through 2018, 2020, it's going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to achieve any of those kind of substantial victories through the Democratic Party. Or any other party for that matter. But if the votes are not counted, if people are not allowed to vote properly, or not vote properly, but if people are not allowed to have their votes counted, then that's an abridgment of our democracy that is going to keep us punched down for years and years to come. And that's something we can't afford. Go back to climate change, the most existential problem that we face as a species. Do you think we can afford more Republican administrations, or at least more Republican administrations that deny climate change? Trump, to be fair, he's galvanized people. He's gotten people off their butts. It's looking like more might actually get done around climate because of how outrageous he is than possibly under a Clinton administration. But are we going to let ourselves be locked into that model? Because that's all the difference. He gets 4 years to turn the GOP into a joke and bury the corporatization economic model for a generation, then we got a shot. We got a chance. But if we don't call out cross-check and other voter suppression tactics like it right now and do it loudly, then the Trumpites are just going to keep getting in based on how many votes and voters they can disenfranchise. And we also need candidates who can inspire enough people to overclock that system. Oh, so you're going to knock X amount of people off the voter rolls. Well, we just inspired this many people to actually show up and vote. Not candidates like Ossoff, who get enough people to show up so it's a close race. No, we need candidates like Barack Obama. The GOP was trying a lot of these tactics against him in 2008 and 2012, but particularly in 2008, he had such an overwhelming margin of victory that those tactics didn't work against him. And similarly in 2012, it was by a more narrow margin, but he still won. And that's essentially how Hillary lost. Because there was no enthusiasm for her campaign, she was not able to accrue enough of a buffer against Donald Trump in order to actually win. Because subtract cross-check, Hillary Clinton won both the popular vote and the Electoral College. But for all of their obliviousness, evidence of this cross-check system was out there for months. There's a reason they ignore it, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to take a quick little break. We're going to finish up with some final thoughts, tie everything together. You're listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. again, ladies and gentlemen. So it's about 6:47, so be about time to cap the show off. So want to let you know about some events coming up this week. So, well, actually, at 7:30 p.m. tonight, there's a meeting of Kalamazoo for Revolution over at Shakespeare's Pub. Does that sound interesting to you? You should come out down and check it out. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. at KVCC is going to be a documentary screening of The Occupation of the American Mind. That's going to be in room 3350. And it is a documentary about the military occupation of Palestine and how the United States has not really seen much coverage of that side of the story. A little bit from the summary here, narrated by Roger Waters and featuring leading observers of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and U.S. media culture. The film explores how the Israeli government, the U.S. government, and the pro-Israel lobby have joined forces, often with very different motives, to shape American media coverage on the conflict in Israel's favor. Also going on this weekend, on Saturday at 1:30, Black Lives Matter Kalamazoo is having a presentation at 1:30 p.m. over at the Fire Historical and Cultural Arts Collective. A couple of members of BLM took part in the Arca Center for Social Justice Leadership Regional Fellowship, and they're going to be having a community presentation on it. The opportunity to ask questions and see how it's going to affect the community and what we'll be working on from here. So, and let me make sure there's nothing else coming up before the next show. Well, no, that's about it. At least as far as on my event calendar. Always keep your ear to the ground, though, because there always seems to be something going on in this town. So, I want to thank all of you for tuning in. Please join us next week, Wednesday. We will have more to talk about, I'm sure, because, man, the BS never stops. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Join us next week, and please keep fighting for that revolution solution.